In this session, we look into God's plan for Egypt and Assyria, the region of the Middle East, in accordance to Isaiah 19. When we think about the Middle East, the first thing that comes to many of our minds would be the centuries-long conflict and unrest. Throughout history, the region has been influenced by various empires, conquests, geopolitical shifts, leading to intermittent periods of peace and conflict. We know that this conflict dates all the way back to the time of Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau. Yet, as we escalate towards the return of Jesus, we will see the greatest restoration of God's family in the Middle East as His end-time plan unfolds. So there are 5 important reasons why we as a Gentile church must know and understand God's purposes for Egypt and the Middle East. Firstly, Egypt, together with Israel and the Arab nations, will be the epicenter and focus of God's end-time plan. We will see the greatest unfolding of both unprecedented conflict and of glory. The healing of Abraham's family will be the epicenter of the end-time drama. It will be the stage for the world to see God's glory unfolding as they witness the greatest healing and reconciliation movement in this region. The second reason is that the end-time drama surrounding Israel, Egypt, and the Arab nations will affect every nation and individuals. The end-time drama in the Middle East is also referred to as the Isaiah 19 Vortex because it will affect the whole earth. Nations worldwide will be drawn into it, and no one will be excluded or able to stay neutral. The third reason is that how God deals with Egypt is the model and prototype and the principle of how God will deal with individuals and other Gentile nations. We will see how He shows His mercy, discipline, judgments, and glory given to Egypt will be the same way that He demonstrates His heart and His dealings towards other nations. The fourth reason is that the Romans 11 verse 11 call to provoke Israel to jealousy is actually in the context of unprecedented anti-Semitism and trouble, and it will be the most demonstrated among believers in the Middle East. Believers in Egypt and the Arab nations will be used as mighty vessels of God to show forth His mercy to the Jewish people, even at the cost of their own lives. So Isaiah 19 crescendos at verse 24. It describes the greatest miracle in history where the descendants of Abraham, including those of Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, will be deeply unified. This miracle of unity occurring throughout the Middle East will be the epicenter of the Spirit's worldwide work of unifying God's people, even in accordance with John 17 verse 21 to 23. The fifth reason is that we are called to contend for the fullness of Egypt and the Arab nations to live out the fullness of their mandate in Isaiah 19. God desires that His people understand and agree with His restoration plan and bring His family back together. Hence, Isaiah 19 is really an important passage for us to understand in this hour. He wants us to trace the historical lines to see how He honors His covenants, or even His word to His people. To Abraham in Genesis 15, to Hagar, Genesis 16 and 17, and even His word to Rebekah of how 2 nations were being formed in her womb in Genesis 25 verse 23. Abraham's family has roots and heritage in Israel, Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. This is God's divine checkmate that He has set in place in the region of the Middle East. So let's dive deeper into this Isaiah 19 vortex. There are 2 main people groups that God speaks about in Isaiah 19, Egypt and Assyria, of course with Israel. The boundaries of Egypt point to the modern-day Egypt. Assyria point to the geographical area of modern-day Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Lebanon, Jordan, Armenia, northern Saudi Arabia, southeast Turkey, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, southwest Iran, and Cyprus. The context of the Isaiah 19 vortex is in Matthew 25 verse 15 to 22, where Jesus prophesies of a time of unprecedented carnage, or what we know as the Holocaust, that Israel will face, especially in the time of the abomination of desolation. He was referencing Daniel 11 and 12, and we also see this in Zechariah 13 verse 8. In this time of trouble, many Jewish people will flee for their lives to the surrounding nations, seeking places of refuge, and these places would primarily be the nations in the Middle East. It is also in the time of the Sum 2 crisis where unholy alliances will be formed between nations who will rage against God's standard and His people, Israel. Yet, God's divine checkmate is in Isaiah 19 verse 23 to 25, where there will be holy alliances between God-loving and God-fearing believers in the nations in the Middle East. They will demonstrate the greater love of laying down their lives for the Jewish people and confound the enemies of God. So to give us an overview of Isaiah 19, Isaiah 19 reveals God's prophetic plans for the nation of Egypt in conforming and transforming her to be his vessels in the time of Jacob's trouble. Isaiah 19 starts off with the burden against Egypt and reveals God's heart for her. God will confront the idols of Egypt, and this confrontation is to ultimately heal Egypt, bring about a national and regional blessing as the people turn to Yahweh as their God. It's interesting to note that Egypt is mentioned about 110 times in the Bible, is mentioned the most after Israel. So God has a plan for Egypt and has ordained her to be a representation of the world and of nations. She is the prototype nation of how God will deal with the rest of the nations. Egypt and the Arab nations will be the first line of defense that God is raising up for Israel in a time of greatest trouble. So there are 5 prophetic decrees across Isaiah 19. First is in verse 16 to 17. God will release his power and judgment on Egypt for the releasing of the fear of the Lord. When God waves his hand through his judgments and the signs and wonders that Egyptian believers will move in, the Egyptians will reckon that there is only one true living God, and he is Yahweh. A nation steeped in generations and generations of idolatry will come to worship and fear Yahweh alone. The second prophetic decree is that there will be 5 cities of refuge in Egypt that speak Hebrew and are filled with believers of Yeshua. This is in verse 18. There will be a great national awakening, where out of this pagan nation many will pledge allegiance to Jesus. God will awaken them to arise as places of refuge for the Jewish people. Many will learn the Hebrew language in preparation for this. In fact, this is already taking place, where many Egyptian children are learning the Hebrew language. The third prophetic decree is that there will be a mature prayer movement in Egypt that will bring forth national deliverance and salvation. This is in verse 19 to 22. She will be the first Gentile nation to know the Lord and fully belong to Yahweh. The fourth prophetic decree is that Egyptian believers will be reconciled with Arab believers in verse 23. There will be deep reconciliation unto unity and partnership. A highway of worship will be established between Egypt and Assyria. The fifth prophetic decree is that Egypt will come together with Israel and Assyria. This is in verse 24 to 25, where God will bring forth supernatural oneness among these 3 people groups that have ancient hatred and hostility to one another. And the fullness of this will be seen in the millennial kingdom. So we may be wondering, why would God orchestrate such drama in the Middle East? We have to remember that Egypt and the nations of Assyria are the most unlikeliest of allies to Israel. This makes the reconciliation work of God in the Middle East a great astonishment and wonder to many. Egypt and Assyria will be fashioned to be vessels of mercy unto Israel. Ultimately, it is to provoke the Jewish people unto jealousy, as in Romans 11. It will prepare the Jewish people to arise as the holy seed. They will be ones who have humility and gratitude towards the Lord, even in his dealings towards them, have loyal love for God and love for the Gentile nations, and a heart to serve them, which is ultimately Israel fulfilling her God-given destiny. So in conclusion, we see that in the region where there will be the greatest carnage, it will also be the greatest platform and theatre for the greater love, in accordance to John 15 verse 13, and greater works, John 14 verse 12, to be demonstrated. This is God's divine checkmate to the enemy. Abraham's family will be healed when the Gentile sons of Ishmael and the sons of Esau are reconciled to each other and to Israel, the sons of Jacob. We will see the fullness and greatest display of oneness of the family of God and the one new man being expressed. This is especially important for the young generation of Arab and Egyptian believers who will live through these events in their lifetime, because they will walk hand in hand with the Jewish people to step into God's destiny and kingdom purposes. Hence, it is important for us to understand and partner with God at the place of intercession for the fullness of God as we escalate towards the Isaiah 19 vortex. As we understand, we are to cultivate strength to choose to stand on God's side, even in increasing intensities. For more details and in-depth teachings on Isaiah 19, you can refer to the links in the description below. We pray that the Lord will direct you into a deeper understanding of what is going to play out, especially in the Middle East, as we escalate towards His return. God bless.